Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Being Unapologetically Authentic with me, your host, Jean Tian. I am so excited to be here with you. We have another special guest. Her name is Brooke Hoover. She is an award-winning actor, writer, creator of short films, web series, and solo shows. She's also a stand-up comedian, a podcaster, and a proud dog mom. Brooke has lost about 100 pounds while dealing with polycystic ovary syndrome and through lifestyle changes, and now she's sharing her tips as well. But she's on our show today to share with us tools that you can use in your communications with your doctor to make sure you get the care that you deserve. Okay. Brooke, welcome so much to the Being Unapologetically Authentic show. I am so glad to have you here. And before we get started into the good stuff about communications with your doctor, could you share a little bit about yourself with the audience?
Yes, I'm an actor, writer, comedian, podcaster myself of the Who's Dat Fat Girl podcast. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I have lost 100 pounds the natural way through diet and exercise in my adult life.
That's amazing. And I love how you say the natural way because there's just so much talk out there about Ozempic and all the other stuff. So it is definitely one of those hot topics for discussion another time. But today I wanted to really focus on communications with your doctor because I think it is so important. And I've experienced it firsthand as well, that oftentimes we don't really know how to communicate with our doctors to ensure that we get the best care, whether it's for ourselves or for our loved ones. So I'd love for you to share with us how we can overcome our fear of speaking up when we're talking to doctors.
Yeah, well, as an actor, I also have a plethora of other jobs, and one of them is being a standardized patient or an actor patient educator, which basically means they hire somebody to teach medical students, so third year, usually second or third year, or sometimes residents, to learn how to speak with regular patients. We are given a script, we are given kind of, like a general outline, and we improv with that based on certain symptoms that we have. I've done that for almost 2 decades. So doing that really actually helped empower me learn how to speak to doctors better. It helped me gain confidence. I think a lot of it, I'll put it into a nutshell because that's 20 years of experience. It's basically realizing that you're not just a patient, you're a customer. I don't necessarily believe the customer is always right, but I do believe that the patient knows their own body. So a lot of times it's, taking a few steps, writing an outline with which to speak to your doctor, questions you might want to ask in advance, even if you have to take notes during it. The doctor takes notes. So I'm like, why not as the patient take notes as well? And, trying to take moments to stop and pause. The doctor won't always do that for you. So if you have to be a little bit more forthright and say, can we take a moment? I'm getting overwhelmed. Let them know. Hopefully they'll understand. If a doctor is completely dismissive of you, if it's an acute care situation, that's one thing. But if this is your specialist or general practitioner, it's time to find someone new if they don't listen to you after your many cues or gentle nudges that, hey, can we take a moment? I'm not processing this information.
Great. And then, so what do you, have you spoken to other patients as well in terms of this type of patient doctor communications and understood, like, have they shared with you what their biggest fear generally is when they're going into that office and not being able to speak up for themselves?
I think it's that the doctors don't have time. I think a lot of that's what it is. And there's a big disconnect with doctors not understanding patients, and myself being someone who used to be about 250 pounds overweight, and having doctors who wouldn't understand or listen to my situation. And they kind of generalize, like doctors tend to generalize people based on their, you know, gender, based on their sexual preference, based on their race, as we know, based on their weight. and it's really, really unfair. But it happens, and it's like you're almost reliving another trauma in a sense. I've talked with a lot of friends and loved ones. I've seen it happen with my family members. My parents are in their 70s, and they are totally now experiencing that whole ageist thing. A lot of doctors are talking to them like they are stupid or children just because they have gray hair. And, yeah, it's just utterly ridiculous. And as patient educator, I mean, sorry, as standardized patient, as actor, medical educators, we are taught, to be a little bit more communicative than the average Joe. And that's unfortunate because not every patient has that kind of training or knowledge. And that's where I'm trying to really help others one by one or through my own podcast, help people become, I don't know, more confident in speaking up.
And what are the consequences for people if they don't speak up and really advocate for themselves in the doctor's office?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. That's the thing, is that sometimes you you don't really have it's your life. I mean, sometimes it is life or death, and sometimes you literally can't speak up for yourself because you're physically or mentally not well enough. It's great to have a patient, like someone, a patient advocate, someone else helping you. Like I tried to help my parents, or my dad has a great friend who tries to help him back home in Louisiana. I've tried to help my mom because when I was young, my mom was there to help me. Um, yeah, you've got to have a patient advocate help you, because if you, or advocate for yourself. If you're not, you might get medication. One of the biggest things is oftentimes patients will say to doctors, "Hey, I don't want to be on meds." And the doctors will not hear that. They will just want to prescribe meds. A lot of times doctors have their own agenda and they have their own stereotypes about people. And I think it's ultimately up to the patient to keep stopping that and not fully trust your doctor. Yes, you should trust your doctor, but have a little bit of, be on your guard a little bit, until they gain that trust.
Yeah. And then, so do you think that there's a difference in terms of necessity for communication when somebody's in the hospital versus the doctor's office? Is one more critical than the other?
Well, the way in which I think Western medicine handles chronic conditions is just not wonderful. So I think they're both equally important, but in different ways. Like an acute situation is obviously more critical, and I've actually seen urgent care or emergency situations in the emergency room go better for my parents or loved ones who I'm there with, close friends, or even myself. Emergency care almost tends to go better because there is no room for error. It's just very boom, 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 like bullet points almost, because that's the situation. So I think chronic care is the one that really needs the bigger conversation, because if you have a chronic condition, or if you're just a healthy person and you're going into your annual physical, or your 6 month or your 3 month visit, and the doctor's not fully listening to you, how are you going to continue wanting to go, and how are you going to continue wanting to be healthy? It almost feels like a moot point if your doctor's like already tuned out.
So, what would be like three tips or tools that you would be able to give to people so that they can better communicate and advocate for themselves in front of their doctors?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, it's easy to say have confidence. But the confidence is something that's gained. It's not something you can muster up all of a sudden. So I will say, take a deep breath before you go in. Try to. I'm preaching to the choir because my blood pressure skyrockets when I'm at the doctor, because I still get nervous, even though I've worked in the medical industry on the back end, kind of. So take deep breaths. Try to remember that even if you feel judged by your doctor, they are analyzing you for a medical reason. Try to not take anything personally, even though it feels like you might, or it feels easy to, and have those notes. Have notes in advance, or take notes while you're going along so you don't feel overwhelmed.
That's great. And then, so what makes you very passionate about, and I think I could tell from what you shared already, but what makes you very passionate about making sure that people know how to advocate for themselves when it comes to medical care?
Yeah, I think, Jean, it's because I was so going through polycystic ovarian syndrome and not having a doctor who could diagnose me. And then when finally a doctor did diagnose me and I got on a good groove with her, when she prescribed me some additional medication that made me faint, literally in the middle of the street in Brooklyn. Uh, And I tried to have a conversation with her, and she just kind of said, "Oh, you're a woman. You have PCOS. You're just going to have to deal with it." That made me feel utterly shut out from quote unquote modern medicine. So I don't want anybody else to have to experience that. I know many people have experienced much, 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 much worse in the physical and mental health realm than I have. I know they've experienced much worse from their doctor, but it's not just that one situation. It's a combination of so many years of not feeling seen, not feeling heard. And I'm like, at the time I was like a Caucasian female in my 20s, like identifying, as straight. So imagine for somebody who's not in that demographic, who's someone in a much different demographic, they're even going to be more swept under the rug by the medical industry unless we all try to change something. And it's hard for the one patient to do it on their own.
So, I mean, I think it sounds also like one of the main tools that you also would advocate or you're a proponent of is to just find the right medical provider. And that's critical as well, because it's not just your communication with your doctor, it's their communication with you too.
Yes. And that's what's so sad and unfortunate. And I've experienced that finding a therapist myself. It shouldn't be like speed dating. It shouldn't be like dating. And not a lot of people have the resources, or the insurance won't necessarily allow you to go pick and choose different doctors. I wish it did. I almost wish it was like a speed date and you can meet with 10 general practitioners and 20 therapists all at once, like within 30-minute increments. And I'm going to pick that one. It stinks that it's really about trial and error. Again, because resources, 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 you know?
And so I think you have a very unique perspective as well, because, and I'm so sorry, I'm blanking out on the name of
Okay.
the role that you play, but you're basically acting as the patient with third year medical students,
Yes.
right?
So it's called standardized patient, or
Thank you.
like medical educator, actor, medical educator. That's fine.
Okay, awesome. And then so you have that unique experience. And, there's two questions that I have for you on that one. Number one is you must have, worked with in that capacity, like many, many medical students. And so you probably got to a point where you can tell right away qualities that make one good versus one not so good. So what have you learned from that you can say, okay, these are the things that you would look out for? Maybe you want to just be careful of when it comes to a medical provider.
Yes. And that's a great question. So I would say first and foremost, and when the students would come back into the room after we, acted out the scenarios and they would want feedback, some of them either number one, sometimes people just have a genuine empathy or they don't. And if they didn't, they would say, "Well, teach me genuine empathy." I'm like, "Well, I can't really teach you genuine empathy. You have to feel it. You have to feel it in your heart, your gut." But certain things you can do are listen more. A lot of doctors don't listen more. So if your doctor's not listening, and you could tell if they're listening with their heart, their gut, their soul, that's what we as actors do. But you can look at their eyes, see what their body language is. Are they closed off? Are they, taking notes is one thing, but taking too many notes almost as a barrier to not want to communicate with the patient, that's a whole other thing. My doctor now, she has to type into this computer because she works for like a conglomerate, like Atlantic Medical Health, right? So she doesn't work for herself. And she's always at the computer, but she's like, "Brooke, I'm so sorry. I hate this computer." And she talks like a real person. She's like, "I'm sorry, I have to enter these notes." And the way in which she says that, acknowledging it, sometimes acknowledging the awkwardness even helps. Medical professionals who just have good eye contact, who will take a pause. There's also a thing in my dentist, I'm going through the process of a dental implant. So that's been crazy. But I love my dental team really for the most part. But the dentist who owns the practice, he said before, "Brooke, I think I give too much information." And I'm like, "I like that, Dr. Dan. But a lot of people don't." And he knows I have this kind of, background. So I'm like, I bet he hates like working on me and loves it at the same time. So sometimes a doctor can overtalk. And it's okay to pause and say, "Hey," like the other day, Dr. Dan, he was working on my dental implant and he said, "I'm going to give you some, it's not laughing gas. What's it called when they give you not nitrous oxide? Basically, I'm going to give you, the numbing shot right now. And it has some adrenaline in it. You may feel your heart rate go up." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, Dr. Dan, wait a second. I said, I have anxiety, number one. We know this. I said, number two, I have borderline high blood pressure, which the anxiety makes worse. I said, number three, I said, do you always put adrenaline into these numbing shots? He's like, oh, yeah. I was like, okay. And he's like, I maybe overspoke. I said, yes, you did. I said, because psychosomatically, I was already getting too nervous because of what you told me. I appreciate the overtelling, but there's that fine line. Or he could have said it like this: hey, Brooke, just so you've had so many numbing shots and all the dental work that you've had in the past couple years. These numbing shots have adrenaline in them. So if you feel a little weird, that's why. But if you don't, it's because you've had so many numbing shots, you're probably used to it. So it's sometimes they can talk too much. I don't like when doctors don't talk enough, but when they talk too much, that can also be a problem too, because it also can mean that they're talking from nervousness and not listening.
Right. And what it sounds like to me, what you're saying is that it's important to know who your patient is too. And
Amen.
so it's very important to get to know them, understand what their worries are, understand what their objectives are, and then being able to craft a message that best suits the person. So for example, if he knew you got super anxious when he had heard that, your message, the message that you think would have been better, right? For him to say.
Hmm.
Now, I think one of the things that I think we all struggle with, right, is knowing what to say and how much to say in any kind of situation as well. And so I think you have also a very unique background in your role as an actor, and you've written short series and web series and short films, I believe. Sorry.
Hmm.
And so, I think communication should just come naturally to you in terms of what people say, how they say
Hmm.
it. So what would you give, and not so much in a medical profession, but like in general, from a communication standpoint, because I think it's applicable to more than just doctors, right? What would you advise others in terms of how to communicate appropriately? And I put appropriately in quotes because I think it's
Hmm.
very subjective.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, just in general, I think open-ended questions are always so much better. Like, I haven't been on a first date in ages because my boyfriend and I have been together almost 13 years. But it's like almost like you're going on a first date with someone. And imagine the other person just asked you questions that are only ending in the answer of a yes or a no. Both of y'all would immediately get so bored. So, an open-ended question instead of like, Gene, are you feeling okay today? And you would just say yes or no or maybe.
Right.
I would say, Gene, what's going on? How are you doing today? It just kind of trying to work in that sense to have more of a conversation. If we can always focus on a conversation instead of a questionnaire. So open-ended questions. And I mean, I obviously eye contact is important, and just being present in that moment. Like I think right now, like I don't know if you have an outline or not, but the way in which you're asking me the questions, it's like you're listening to what I'm saying, and I'm talking a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot, and you're taking it in and then processing that question based on that. So if anybody wants to learn communication skills, what you're doing right now is also great as being a good listener and processor, and then like having a back and forth. I hope that kind of answers the question because I went on a
It
tangent.
does. No, you didn't go on a tangent. It does answer the question. I also believe very strongly in asking questions, and I think open-ended questions are a great way to start. Now, I think it also makes this assumption that we want to find out more about the other person.
Hmm.
And so what that really brought to mind was, as an actress, how do you fake the interest? Because honestly, like if we're all honest with each other, we're not always interested in learning about the other person.
Hmm.
So what can we do to quote unquote fake it, or to shift our perspective around so that we can become more interested in the other person?
Yes, and that is hard. And one of my side jobs, I work for producers of theater, and sometimes dealing with a lot of people and a lot of fires to put out. And I mean, to theater people, and I'm a theater person at heart, theater is so important. And sometimes you're like, oh my God, it's not. It's not a life or death emergency. But having to like be present and act like it is, or having to act like you want to listen to these people at these
Right.
networking things when honestly, I'd rather just be home with my dogs. It's just And another thing is, how do you end the conversation when
Right.
somebody doesn't feel the natural ebb and flow of a conversation? So, yeah, this is all hard stuff. A lot of it's just saying, I feel like oftentimes the way in which I speak, I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, rad, cool. And I talk very like colloquially,
Right.
and that can either put people off or people like immediately feel like I'm their best friend, which can be a blessing and a curse. So I think just to really keep the eye contact when you're listening to somebody. And when you feel like you can interject with a statement or information about yourself that is relating to what the other person's saying, not topping it or not making up for it or not, downplaying what they're saying. But if you can find that moment of connection, throw that in there because that's also like a conversation grabber. Like, again, conversations like a back and forth. And again, it helps me when I've had better sleep because if I'm tired, I can zone out. Like I can keep my eyes with toothpicks and proverbial toothpicks all I want. But even as an actor, like it's hard to act interested when you're not. So I guess like I just try to like stand up and like have a physical space taking up like that I don't feel too tired. So I'm standing up straight and all that and just actively trying to engage. And then, especially if you're at a party or networking event, knowing when it's time to like gracefully bow out, like, this was so great. Great talking to you. I hope to catch up with you again. I've got to go talk to Melissa over here, something like that.
Right. I love this. And, it's so interesting because we originally started off with communicating and how to be an advocate with your medical provider, but this has turned into a much broader conversation. And I think even the tools that you shared for both patient and doctor is applicable to any type of situation where there's more than one person. So I would love to take this opportunity to recap. So as a patient, one of the tools or a couple of the tools that you think are important are to be confident, to ask questions, which is also one of the tools for the doctors as well, and to look around for the doctor that really resonates with you and will listen to you as well. And I think on the reverse side, it's so important because now that doctors, patients will look around for the one that will listen to them best. It's important to listen to your patients, to also ask the open-ended questions and to really know who your customer is, who your patient is. And I think from a broader scale, what you've also mentioned is that having the eye contact, having the ebb and flow with the conversations, these are really important. And also, I think in terms of the conversing part, if I understood you correctly, and my memory is so shot already, but if I remember correctly, I think it's also asking the questions with the other person as well,
Mhm.
right? I think what you
Yes.
mentioned with a first date, asking those open-ended questions as well. Is there anything that I missed that I definitely should include in the summary of tools that we just talked about?
I feel like you really got it. And one other thing,
Yes,
obviously,
please.
body language. So,
Yes.
and that whole thing of like you want to walk into an interview and feel proud of yourself. So, like, you'll stand up, and take up space. That whole thing, I know it sounds cheesy, but also when you're communicating with somebody else, and I'll explain this for friends who aren't listening to this, on the YouTube for people who are just solely listening to this on the
Yes.
podcast. So now, like when you're kind of crossing your arms, that are closing in, that's obviously not good body language. And also, this is a number one thing with eye contact. Do not look somebody up and down. Like, do not. And I mean, like, obviously, when dudes might do that, like a sleazy guy does that to a girl, or sometimes my mom will do that to me. And I'm like, you're judging what I'm wearing. People don't like that. Like, don't scan up and down with the eyes. I've had doctors do that to me before when I was heavier as well. And it
Wow.
feels really off-putting. So it's like,
Yeah.
are people not aware of this? And I think a lot of people are not aware of how their body language comes across to other folks.
Yeah, and when, and I'm also aware of that as well in terms of the scanning and the and kind of the insecurity that it can cause the other person. So if I am scanning, it's usually because like I appreciate something that the other person is wearing
Mhm.
or is doing, and so I'll make it a point to compliment the person that I'm sharing my thoughts on it because I don't want the other person to take it the wrong way because to your point, it can be very off-putting. So if I am going to do that, it's usually like I'll usually follow up, and I'm not saying be fake about it. Like, just don't do it if you're going to be mean about it. But if you're doing it because you're appreciating something that the other person has, then absolutely share that, because it's definitely worth the share, and it can absolutely brighten somebody's day as well when you
Yes,
do that.
totally.
So I would love for you to share with our audience, what you offer in terms of, like, do you offer coaching, or do you offer, I know you do the standardized patient care. I got it this time.
This is
My
good.
brain works every so often.
Yeah, mine does
And how
too.
they can find you, and yeah, share with us, share with the audience, if they want to find more of you, where would they look?
Sure, and thank you. It's my name, brookehoover.com. That's Brooke with an E and Hoover with a V, like the vacuum, brookehoover.com. If you want the podcast, you would just do myname.com/podcast. It's Who's Dat Fat Girl. I do offer coaching for public speaking, I do stand-up comedy. So I've taught children stand-up comedy. I've taught actors acting. I've taught public speaking to lawyers. So whoever might want to learn how to speak better, communicate better. Obviously, I've taught it to medical students and residents in the medical realm. But I'm mainly wanting folks to listen to my podcast and to just come on board with that as well.
Awesome. So for those of you who are listening, all of the links with the podcast and also Brooke's website will be included in the show notes. So it will be a simple click, and you can find more of Brooke on those links. And do you have anything else you would like to share before we close out the episode, Brooke?
Just thank you so much for having me. I think you're such a good interviewer. You
Oh,
said
thanks.
your brain is like only half working. I think your brain is working at 110%.
Thanks.
My brain, when I interview people, I'm like, what? So I think you're so great. Again,
Thank
communication
you.
skills, so wonderful. I had a really good time. Thank you so much, Jean.
Aw, thank you so much for being here. We certainly learned a lot, and a lot more than what we were originally going to talk about. So this was like a 2-in-1 BOGO deal. So I'm super excited. And for everyone that is listening, if this has resonated with you, please like and follow and subscribe for more of these episodes. And please go follow Brooke for her episodes as well to learn more from her. And if you know anyone who would benefit from Brooke's advice, any doctors, any patients, I mean, we're all patients, right? Because we all see doctors. Definitely share with your friends and family. And we will see you again next time. Thanks, everybody.